There's a man in his late 30s, sitting in the driveway of his house, staring at the car he spent 30 years dreaming about, and he feels nothing. The keys are still warm in his hand, the paint is perfect, the engine ticked down quietly after the drive home. Everything he wanted is right in front of him, and somehow that is the problem. This is not a story about a car. This is a story about what happens when a dream finally stops being a dream and becomes a driveway. Millennials, the generation born between 1981 and 1996, spent their childhoods building emotional relationships with machines they could not touch. The 1994 Toyota Supra, the Mazda RX7, the Acura NSX, the Mitsubishi Eclipse. These were not just cars, they were promises. And now, decades later, the generation that grew up wanting them has started buying them, and a quiet, uncomfortable truth is beginning to surface. Getting the dream does not always feel like winning. Nobody talks about this part. Everyone celebrates the purchase. The Instagram post gets thousands of likes, the comments fill with fire emojis and congratulations. But 3 months later, when the novelty has faded and the insurance bill arrives, and the car sits in the garage because it is too precious to drive in the rain, something shifts. The feeling that was supposed to arrive never did. And the man in the driveway starts asking a question he never expected to ask. Was it worth it? Psychologists have a name for this: arrival fallacy. It is the false belief that reaching a long-sought goal will produce lasting happiness. The brain, in its relentless forward motion, is extraordinarily good at imagining how good something will feel, and extraordinarily bad at understanding how quickly that feeling fades. Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert spent decades studying this exact phenomenon. His research shows that humans consistently overestimate how happy future events will make them. The bigger the dream, the harder the landing. And for millennials who spent 30 years building this particular dream, the landing can be devastating. The obsession started early. In the 1990s, something specific happened in the psychological development of an entire generation. Television, video games, and film converged at exactly the moment when young brains were most vulnerable to emotional imprinting. Developmental psychologists identify the period between ages 8 and 14 as a critical window for identity formation. Whatever produces strong emotion during this window tends to stay permanently embedded. And during this window, certain cars were everywhere. Gran Turismo didn't just let children race, it gave them a garage, a place to own a Supra, to modify an RX7, to form something that felt almost like a relationship with a machine. The Fast and the Furious didn't just put these cars on screen, it built a moral universe around them, where the people who drove these cars were loyal, free, and worth becoming. For millions of children, these cars stopped being objects. They became part of the plan for who they were going to be. But here's what nobody tells you about plans formed at age 9. They don't come with an expiration date. They sit quietly inside the nervous system, gathering weight with every passing year. Research in goal persistence psychology shows that deferred dreams do not weaken over time, they intensify. The longer a meaningful goal remains out of reach, the more psychological significance it accumulates. For millennials, the dream kept getting pushed back. Student debt arrived first, then the 2008 financial collapse hit exactly as the generation entered the workforce. Then a decade of stagnant wages followed. The Supra stayed a screensaver, the RX-7 stayed a pusher. The dream didn't die, it just waited. And waiting made it bigger than any car could ever actually be. This is the part that breaks people, because the car they finally buy is a machine. It needs oil changes, it rattles on cold mornings, the seat bolsters wore in ways the video game never showed. The dream version of the car existed in a perfect, frictionless world where it never broke down, never cost more than expected, and never sat in traffic. The real version exists in the actual world, and the actual world has a way of making even the most beautiful things ordinary. A researcher studying millennial consumer behavior found that a significant portion of dream car purchases were followed within 2 years by feelings of financial anxiety, relationship strain, and a quiet but persistent sense of anticlimax. The car was everything they imagined. The feeling was not. There's something even deeper happening underneath the regret. Something that takes a long time to see clearly. Psychologist Dan McAdams has spent decades studying how humans construct personal narratives, the internal stories people tell about who they are and where they are going. His research shows that people need narrative coherence. They need the story of their life to feel continuous and complete. For millennials, buying the childhood dream car was never really about the car. It was an act of narrative repair. It was a way of going back to the version of themselves that existed before adulthood complicated everything, before debt and compromise, and the slow negotiation of a life that looked nothing like the plan. The car was the last remaining door back to that version of themselves. And when they walked through it and found an ordinary room on the other side, the grief was real, not for the car, for the story they had been telling themselves for 30 years. This is why the regret cuts so deep. It is not buyer's remorse in the ordinary sense. It is something closer to the loss of a future that was never going to exist. The Supra in the driveway is not a disappointment, it is evidence. Evidence that the feeling they were chasing was never stored in the car. It was stored in the person they were when they first fell in love with it. A child watching a screen, certain that the world was larger and more possible than anyone had yet told them. That feeling cannot be purchased. It cannot be restored. It cannot be parked in a garage and admired on weekends. If you are a millennial who has felt this, or who is afraid of feeling this, the question worth sitting with is not whether the car was worth it. The question is what you are actually looking for. Because the dream was never about the car. It was about who you thought you would become when you finally got it. And that person, the free one, the one with the open road and no compromises, was already inside you before the keys ever landed in your hand. The car just helped you remember. Drop a comment below and tell me, did you ever get your dream car? And did it feel exactly the way you imagined?